So, my name's Bobby Lockhart, or Bobby Locks. This is what my face looks like. This is what my chest looks like. It's a condition. I won't be taking questions. I've worked on a number of very silly games at various places. I live in Chicago right now, which is this very silly place in itself. And we have a whole history of silliness that sort of emanates from these two places, the Second City and I.O. And these are the birthplaces of modern theatrical comedy, especially improv comedy, which is a system of humor. And I'll describe what I mean by that later. It's very, very, very silly. There's probably more improv clubs than bars. I'm exaggerating. We like to drink. But it comes out of the work of these two amazing people who, Viola Spolin created the idea of theater games in general, and thus short-form improvisation. And Del Close created the idea of long-form improvisation and sort of honed it down to a science with a thing called the Herald, which I'll describe in a bit. So what do I mean by systems of humor? Well, you can think of it sort of by contrast with gags. So gags are basically content, jokes, physical humor, anything that's sort of, and I think every art form has its own form of gag as well. So like, there's things you can only do in radio, like, quick, slide the floor back under the walls. That's a goon show gag. And then systems of humor, which are not content, but sort of a way of creating humor. And that's exemplified in sort of normal performance by the Herald. So the Herald is a procedure for doing long-form improv, and basically it goes like this. You have scenes, and then group game, and then another group of scenes, and then another group game, and then another group of scenes. And the scenes go A1, B1, C1, A2, B2, C2, A3, B3, C3. And what that means is the first scene in the first group of scenes relates to the first scene in the second group of scenes, and so on. And by doing this procedure, not only do you seem funny because you're doing sort of honest scene work and also coming together in between for a breather, that's what the group games are for, so that the pacing works out. And then at the end, you bring them all together. And because they seem connected, A's are connected to A's, B's are connected to B's, etc., you seem brilliant when you put it all together at the very end. So not only funny, but super smart. Let's talk about some gags. Darn it, I really need my notes. So gags, physical humor, jokes. Well, yeah, you know what gags are. They're brilliant, but they also have a flaw, which is they don't exactly have a timelessness necessarily, which is how in a Disney film, which is usually filled with timelessness, you get this Arsenio Hall joke. Who knows who Arsenio Hall is? Yeah, okay. But in 10 years, it's going to go down. There are a lot of great games that are sort of foundationally based on gags. This is The Secret of Monkey Island. A lot of adventure games have a gag reflex. The Portal 2, super funny. the Stanley Parable. These are just recent examples of gag, not dependent games, but games that have a heavy gag element. And it's mostly jokes, but you can, there's also like posters, physical humor, things that you can point to. This is a graph. All presentations have to have graphs. So there you go. Here's an inspirational quote. I'm told that this is also mandatory. I hope that you are happy, Dolores. Okay. So, systems of humor, back to the opposite of gags. So the first of these, there aren't that many systems of humor created so far, which is really upsetting, and I wish I was smart enough to think of more, but these are just ones that I've observed and used. So loose controls is the first one. A lot of people make a mistake with this sort of system of humor and think that what's funny about it is the floppy physics. The floppy physics is certainly icing on the cake and can sort of stave away the frustration element. But what's funny about this is you try to do something and then it doesn't quite work out. And it can't be totally wrong. It has to work out a little bit, but only enough that you can laugh at the result, but come back stronger again. This is Omnibus. This does not have the floppy physics, but it has like destructible environment and a generally silly set of goals, which is like, in this case, you're trying to have all these tourists survive and visit all the tourist destinations, but you're in a weird pinball environment. This is Sausage Sports Club. You are manipulating a floppy animal trying to play sports, especially soccer in this case, but your head wiggles around and it's hard to get a handle on where you're pushing the ball or pushing other players. These are all, those last three were all developed in Chicago, and I don't think that it's a coincidence, but there are also silly loose control games based elsewhere. You can see, I'm sure you've played at least one of these. I mean, it's going to be this one. Let's just marvel at that for a minute. Oh, and I thought of a really good one. I've lost it. It's in my presenter notes. So the second system of humor type that I want to talk about is joke generators. It has a similar set of pitfalls to jokes, but this is a great way of making the player feel like they're the one being funny, which they're usually not. Like, jokes are so hard to write, and there actually is no sort of real procedure to writing a good joke, which is why we revere the people who do it well. But we can make sort of training wheel jokes, and that's what things like M+DEVs are about. The arrow is pointing to a missing image. So thanks conference. But it's basically one of these faces which I use to sort of represent the concept of systems of humor, because this is the first one that I ever encountered. It took me forever to find a clean set of Cards Against Humanity hands on the internet, just like looking through endless reams of pictures of hands of Cards Against Humanity. This one, again, it has that, who's going to remember Kanye West in 20 years? Kanye West, yes. this is Quiplash, which is one of the Jackbox games. And again, like, the great thing about these joke generators is you can get to a certain level of funny very easily. The problem is you can't get above that level of funny. There's like a ceiling on how funny you can be with one of these systems, because if you're writing jokes with no framework around, you can do whatever you want. You can play with people's expectations in myriad ways. This is a big number. So the third system is the human lens. The basic idea is humans are amused by the ways that other humans fuck up. And we just like make it easier for them to fuck up in an interesting way, and other people will be amused. And now the interesting thing here is like some of these systems are made to be humorous as their goal, right? So like this is picture telephone. And basically write some kind of a sentence, and then the next person has to draw it, and then the next person has to write what they think that represents as a sentence, and the next person has to draw that, et cetera, et cetera. And the goal, as with telephone and many others, is to be funny. But the goal of like Pictionary, or Draw Something in this case, is to actually get some information across. Joke generator, that system, almost always is just to be funny for your particular audience. Like, I haven't seen yet a joke generator system used on the way to some other goal. So that might be just an inherent limitation, or it might be a failure of imagination. The fourth thing I want to talk about is the silly ritual. So if I said, you're going to play chess, but every time you make a move, you have to make a fart sound. And the fart sound has to be representative of the chess move you're making. So if you're doing a long bishop, but if you're doing like a simple castle, maybe it's, I don't know, the point is the fart sound has nothing to do with the chess move, but it's a ritual that you've agreed upon. And the humor, it doesn't come necessarily from the actual ritual activity, although farts are always hilarious. It comes from just the juxtaposition of what the ritual activity is and what the sort of meaningful activity is. So in Robot Turtles, we've got a pretty standard sort of, this is a game where we're teaching children to code through a board game, and they have to sort of wrap their mind around these very mechanical things. But to make it more amusing, the creator of Robot Turtles said, okay, the person who is being the computer in this game also has to make a sound that is determined by the kid whose piece it is that you're going to move. And there's a lot of just hilarious potential in having a kid decide, okay, the grown-up who's pretending to be the computer in this game has to make the sound of a kitty cat every time they move your piece. The same goes with Munchkin. So like if you, the way I learned Munchkin, you actually have to knock on the deck as you knock down the door, so that this is the first thing you do is you actually like, it has no gameplay consequences, whatever, but then you turn your card and you get it. And drinking games fall under this category of this silly ritual. Although, again, that's what's the real goal of drinking games? Again, to be funny. Yeah, a lot of beginner improv games fall into this category. So like Zip Zap Zop. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's basically just a listening game where you're doing something very mechanical. There's no thinking behind it, but if you fail to do that ritual or do it in a strange way, or it's just juxtaposed with the actual activity of just keeping sort of a thread going, and that makes it funny for some reason. If you came to this talk hoping that I would explain to you what humor is, what things are funny and what are not, and how that works, I'm sorry. Nobody knows that. I especially don't know that, as my wife will tell you. Okay, so time to make this presentation interactive. Ready, Dolores? Okay, everybody please stand. We're going to do a simple little activity, and that activity is called blind obedience. Everybody sit the fuck down. What do you think this is? Sheeple. Okay, so quick recap. We're talking about gags versus systems of humor. This is what my chest looks like. Again, I won't be taking questions about my chest at the end. These are the 4 systems of humor in game design that I talked about. And again, this image is missing. This is supposed to be the systems image over here. And it's a spectrum, which means that there's not systems over here and gags over here, although there are some clear-cut examples. There's also some not so clear-cut examples, like, great. Well, the silly drunk walk in Red Dead Redemption is what I was going to point to, because on one hand, it's a system created by the programmer that is inherently silly looking, and it has loose controls to it, so you're trying to walk, but it won't let you, so it's authored, so that's the gag part, is that somebody created this walk and they could look at it in their animation viewer, and it probably was funny there. And then if you put it in the game, the player gets to steer it, and now it has that second quality of being a system. So it's not clear-cut in every example. Oh, come on now. Hello. All right. Oh, no. This one's for Dolores. I apologize. Very simple. And yeah, that's my talk. So yeah, let's talk about funny things. Gosh, I feel like I had so much more to say, but I can't access it. Very frustrating. But hopefully questions will bear it out. Yes?
I've got one that, thanks, by the way. That was really good.
Thank you.
Really nice. I think it's a really helpful talk. I'd be really curious to hear a little bit about your design process when you're thinking, or when the switch flips and you're like, okay, I want to employ humor.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you?
Oh, boy. Well, I mean, I feel like the easiest thing to go for really is gags, because if you're trying to make a game funny and you already have a game, it's really hard to impose a system of humor on that. Sometimes you can make mini games, especially if it's a multiplayer experience. It's pretty easy to do sort of party games. That's like a deep well of funny stuff that is so old and so time-tested that adapting it can be easy. I don't have a good answer for that. Yeah, my first impulse is always just to write jokes. If you're trying to make something funny, yeah, writing is cheap, voiceover acting is relatively cheap compared to paying to produce an entire system of humor. But I think it is worth it because it's the type of humor that can be unique to games. Like, I talk about party games, but digital games, whatever, like, that's the humor that's idiomatic to our art form, is the system kind. You can see jokes in other media. Yeah?
Would you consider games like the I Am Bread game, where it like gives you the most aggravating controls?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Controls
absolutely, yeah. And I feel like that is even inspired by some of the earlier ones too. So like, if you've played Goat Simulator. Oh wow, my computer restarted. Good time. Yes.
What are some of your favorite examples of humor systems in
I still think maybe my first is my favorite. The M+DEVs is so accessible, and even one of the great things about M+DEVs is that you can have, if you play it with kids, they can create words that are entirely appropriate and fit perfectly in that sentence and are not funny to us. But because they don't know that, they think it's funny, and then we laugh at them. Yeah?
You said there was like a ceiling to certain systems of humor.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Sure. So if you play enough rounds of Cards Against Humanity, it will never get funnier than the funniest hand on the first round of Cards Against Humanity. And I think that's just because you get a sense, like players of any game naturally sort of explore their possibility space, and they do it really fast. So once you've found like the peak funny thing, even if it doesn't come out naturally by the randomness of the cards, you can kind of imagine like, oh, I see, you can pair this really disgusting thing with this Holocaust joke, and oh boy, that's gonna be gold. Yeah. We're good? Thank you so much. We're ending early. Don't forget to tip your waitresses.